My name is Phathiswa Magopeni, and I'm an SABC News journalist, and I stand by my story. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Actually, I want to narrow it down to financing independent public service journalism, and that's what I want to talk to. The question that I want to ask, or the two questions that I want to ask, for whose benefit does independent public service journalism exist? And whose interest does an independent public news service, in this case SABC News, should serve? And as we talk about financing of public service journalism, I want us to consider where we locate our discussion. Are we talking about the sustainability or profitability of both? Or is it even desirable to talk about profitability when we talk about news media? And as we consider our perspectives on financing independent public service journalism, it is worth noting the following. We are talking about putting the citizens at the center of the journalistic endeavor and locating our journalism firmly in the lives of the citizenry. And that means financing this brand of journalism should be geared at delivering universal access to high-quality news and information, creating platforms for public dialogue, and providing opportunities for citizen-driven conversations. And robust citizen engagement on issues of public and national concern is critical to the development of our society and strengthening our democracy. The task of a public news service is to create opportunities for citizens to talk about and have conversations about their lives, the spaces they occupy, their aspirations and dreams. Our task is to reflect the nation to the world to the nation, and the nation to itself, and do so without any hindrance. As journalists in public service, we constantly ask ourselves, what society do we envisage as a result of the quality and texture of journalism we deliver to the citizens? And delivering high quality, compelling and independent broadcast journalism in particular is knowledge and resource intense. So whose duty is it to foot the bill? SABC News is a primary source of news and information for millions of South Africans. We provide news services to 19 radio stations in 13 languages, including Kuntali and Kwedam, 3 free-to-air television channels, a dedicated news channel, and digital platforms. Our coverage has to reflect that we are not out of touch with the reality of the millions that we serve, who occupy different geographical, cultural, religious, socio-economic, and linguistic spaces. We are morally and ethically obliged to provide content that assists citizens to make informed decisions in their daily lives, be it subsistence or emerging commercial farmers who have to respond to changing climate patterns, the domestic worker who has to decide how much money to save to afford school uniforms for her children when the school term starts in January, or the investor who wants to track markets and decide which stocks present better investment opportunities. And in this regard, costly as it is, the public interest obligation calls upon us to provide independent journalism that is free of interference and censorship as a public good. We are further obliged to provide untrammeled news and current affairs content that reflects views that mirror diversity of voices in our country. Doing so ensures that citizens are appropriately well informed to participate fully in developing and enhancing our democracy. So, taking all this into account, can we as a country and citizens afford to have the public interest obligation eroded by financial constraints? To what extent are we concerned, if we really are, about the negative impact of not providing news content that serves the needs of the public and nothing else? Is there commitment and will to fund public interest content? Is the funding model, as well as policy and regulatory environment, enabling the SABC to honor what is effectively a constitutionally derived social compact between the public broadcaster and the citizens? Broadcast journalism is costly from the perspective of both editorial quality and technical resourcing. Therefore, how committed are we as a country to financing high-quality programming and compelling independent journalism? If there is no commitment to fund independent journalism as a public good, what is the cost to our democracy? What is the cost to social cohesion? What is the cost to human development and socio-economic transformation in the country? If we don't provide universal access to high-quality independent journalism and general content, what is the cost to the millions of South Africans who rely on the public broadcaster for news, information, entertainment, and education? What is the cost of not funding the coverage of the voices in the periphery of society to our democracy? Whose duty is it to fund independent public service journalism? We should all be concerned about the future of independent journalism and how it is financed. So how do we finance it?
Phathiswa, we've already heard from you. Maybe I do think, even at the Zondo Commission recently, it's incredible, all the debates about SABC for many years. I think some people understand the distinction very clearly, but some people still struggle with the distinction of public versus state broadcaster. By the way, we even saw the finance minister in a document recently talk about the SABC in terms of being a national state broadcaster. Could you just maybe make that distinction clear? I think it'll be a nice introduction.
Okay. Actually, for me, the distinction is easy. We just choose not to understand it for various reasons. And there's a particular sector of the society that chooses not to understand the difference. Public broadcasting is about the public. It's done in the interest of the public, and it serves the needs of the public. And it's about making sure that you serve the information and news needs of your citizenry, and it's meant to drive the conversations of the citizens, and it's got nothing to do with the state, it's got nothing to do with government. When we cover government, and it's something that we're invested in, we do it in the interest of the public. It's about getting the public to understand whether government is meeting the they've made at the time of the election cycle that we get to see, depending on whether it's local government or national government elections. So it would be the two cycles that we tend to follow. So for us, it's to hold everyone to account, including business leadership. And also, it's not about delivering information as provided by government, it's about providing critical watchdog journalism and ensuring that everyone does what they have promised the citizens. I remember making this example, and I know it got me into a very interesting space, that in cases where editors find themselves having to assign reporters to go and cover a minister or a government official or a head of an agency that's cutting a ribbon or switching on a tap, that's a problem. It is not our job to do that. There are government agencies that are meant to do that job. It's not the job of a public news service to do that. Our job is to ask questions around whatever is being done. If after 25 years, it's only now that you are providing clean water to this community, tell us how you got to reach 25 years to deliver clean water to that community. And we talk to the citizens about how this water that's being provided 25 years later is going to assist them live better lives. That's the kind of journalism that we provide to the public. and not making announcements. It is not our task to do that.
Lovely, thank you. Everybody is living the funding crisis. It is the SABC. I think it's public knowledge. The SABC has said we've run out of cash, and you've got to deal with that, the resource constraints. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how that affects what you're trying to do right now?
Something as basic as not being able to get the skills that you require to produce the content or the quality of the content that you want to produce, and that's meant for your public. That's a big thing. And it's also the fact that we're trying to drive conversations and that citizens get to engage in these public dialogues about issues of provincial, local, and national concern. You are not able to deliver that at the scale that you would want to because of the resource constraints. One thing that is a huge problem, it's the fact that you have an entity that relies on advertising, classical advertising and sponsorships. If you look at the fact that 84% of our revenue comes from that, and you have 13%.
I think it's worth repeating, 84%
yes,
of SABC's revenue,
yes.
Not government, not licenses, but from advertising revenue.
Heavily dependent on classical advertising and sponsorships. And 13%, is your license fee collection. And 3% is a government grant that's meant for educational and religious programming. 3%. And if you look at the 3%, it doesn't even cover half the salaries of the news division, because the salary bill for the news division is sitting at around 650 million rand, 650 million rand. So if you talk about something close to 300 million rand, yeah, that's exactly where you're looking. So one of the problems with heavily relying on advertising is the fact that even though your advertising sector may not dictate what you do, there is a tendency to want to lean towards what they prefer in the way you produce your content, because it assists you to generate revenue. They may not dictate, but because you know that you will get the money that you want if you sort of gear your programming towards what they are looking for. And it's a huge problem. So it's actually similar to any other form of interference, even though you may end up doing it without being told. The other issue is the fact that when you look at what is being presented as solutions to the problems that news media is facing, like your paywalls, you cannot put public content behind a paywall. It's meant to be available to the public. You cannot do that. Yeah. So it is not an option for us. And that applies to the membership that you're talking about. Every citizen who relies on the public broadcaster for content is a member. So there's no exclusivity in that space. So there are other things that we have to think about in terms of how we innovate in a manner that assists us to generate revenue. I mean, one of the things that we are looking at is using our facilities to generate revenue. Even though it's not something that we are going to see results, substantial results immediately, but it's something that we need to look at. You have these vans that are parked somewhere in Auckland Park, and you look at them and you say, over the weekends, what do? They do nothing. Over the festive season, you have a whole December period when they are parked there. It's the cost of warehousing them, the cost of providing security so that no one touches them. So what do they do during those periods? What are the options that you have? Can you harvest all of that and set up a separate business for broadcasting facilities that you can hire out and generate revenue differently and have a different business model that runs parallel to what you do?
Sell South African news to Africa, to the world? Could the SABC get involved in it?
So you can do that as innovating from the core. And you can also look at your adjacent businesses, which is about your segments that are underserved, that include your African languages market. We are not doing enough in terms of providing content to our African languages segment. The fact that we still rely on linear television as an appointment viewing at 7 o'clock, at 5:30, and this is the only time that we provide news content to those communities, it's not right. It is not right. And if you look at, again, boosting your capacity to generate classical advertising, if we were to do more of that and service that market with the same intensity that we service our English audiences, you are likely to see something else.
Is there, I mean, I heard murmurs when people realize how much the SABC is reliant on advertising. And a lot of people are questioning the whole model, whether it works. So the SABC has a public mandate. It should be going out into all communities, rural communities that aren't paying, won't sort of generate advertising revenue, and not only focus on the urban dwellers with the cash and sort of feed their needs. The overall model, is it sustainable, or should South Africa be looking at something completely different, a complete overhaul?
I think it's in how we work on what we have currently. So it's a sponsorship, it's the government grant, and your advertising and sponsorship revenue. So if you were to elevate some of the aspects, look at your government grant and raise the level of contribution at that point, you are bound to see a different result. But again, when you do that, there are fears of interference, that should we start becoming dependent or getting more contribution from that side, there's bound to be interference, there's bound to be things that get dictated in terms of what we cover. But the thing is, even at 3%, we have seen interference. We have seen the kind of things that we don't want to see. So how robust are our assumptions regarding what government contributes? And when you look at the level of interference. So is it conclusive that if you don't get money from government, there will be no interference, if it happens at 3%?
Sure. Carol, I want to come to you, but very quickly, is there a good model out there? I mean, is there a best practice model for a public broadcaster in the world that we could follow?
We can look at international practices. We can look at what you would see as an international benchmark. But is our situation conducive for that? Because we have to look at our realities. You have to look at the stage of development of our country and what we are trying to achieve with public broadcasting.
Philip, you wanted to jump in. I told the panelists they can jump in if they want to disagree with each other on any.
I'm listening to Sia talking about the digital platforms. It's an area that we're looking at. In April, we launched our news app. And this news app, it's basically our transformational innovation because it was meant to change the way we do business. And it's also tracking consumption patterns in terms of how news consumers are tracking news content. So if you look at that, the news app carries all 19 radio stations, and it has the 24-hour news channel live, and it also has our .com in it. So you can read, you can watch, and you can listen to the content that you find. So it's a portal
to everything that SABC offers.
Yeah. So it deals with two things: immediacy and your accessibility, ease of access of the content. But the cost of data, it changes the entire thing. So you have this brilliant digital platform that's meant to solve your problems and the problems of your citizens that consume your news content. But you cannot achieve anything with the cost of data that we experience as South Africans. So you basically have people where they should be watching the news content on the news app, watching the news channel. They would rather go to YouTube and look for live content if it's there, because it's better going that route than consuming the content on the news app. So there's something else that needs to happen there, and it's a policy issue that needs to be dealt with.
So this, let's clarify, it's not the cost to the SABC of running the app, it's the cost
to the consumer.
People on the ground. Yeah. And what a pity, because we know in South Africa, people go to phones before they get a laptop, and consuming on your phone is an incredible resource. You wanted to come in, Karen?
Something that Philip made reference to, it's the news consumer ecosystems. But when you say that broadcasting is not necessarily in that space and that we just used to broadcasting, it's not actually what we are doing now, because we have realized that there's power in being on digital platforms and getting consumers to engage with your content. But what I have seen, even outside broadcast media, is that we just leave audiences to talk to themselves on digital platforms. We are not engaging with them as the people who have produced their content. So there is no conversation that takes place there. We allow them to shout at each other and disagree, but no one is actually there to say, but this story was about this community and this is what it meant. That is not happening in the way we create the ecosystem. But also, once you pay attention to the ecosystems, you actually create a network effect, which is what you use as a currency to advertisers, because you have created an environment where everybody converges on your platform or your ecosystem, and they come and have conversations there. And that's what we need to drive.
I'm glad you raised this, because I was going to say, we say social media has disrupted traditional media, but SABC does put clips out on YouTube. There's a lot of Twitter interaction. I think our digital platform is brilliant.
It's brilliant, but it's
underrated.
What
People
it's
don't know what we're doing. Yeah. Okay, so you're just saying you can go so much further, but you can harness what is out there already.
It's not just about dumping content on digital media. You need to get people to engage with the content and ensure that the engagements are moderated, and we're not doing that at the moment.
I'm